Welcome back to If You Can Keep It, the podcast from the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. This is Pat Garrett, the Communications Director here at WILL, or WILL. And joining me again is our host, Rick Essenberg, President, Founder, and General Counsel at the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. For those just tuning in, Rick is a leading voice in constitutional law who tells it like it is. He's a go-to expert on constitutional rights, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and a staunch advocate for limited government and the separation of powers, no matter who's in office. Rick founded WILL to defend our constitutional principles, and now we dive into key topics the conservative movement must grapple with on the If You Can Keep It podcast. This is the second episode of 6 episodes planned for the summer. Find the full schedule on our website, will-law.org/podcast. Our next episode will be released on July 7th. Rick, it's great to be back with you. Last time we officially launched our podcast, and now we'll talk about the 4th of July. So before you all hit your boat, barbecue, or lake house, give Freedom and Liberty a listen in this next episode. So Rick, great to be back. Last time we officially launched our podcast, and now today we're going to talk about the 4th of July. It's just a few days away, and why this day isn't just about fireworks, but nearly 250 years of American freedom and liberty.
I'm all for it.
Do you believe is America's core founding principles? How have they grown over time of 250 years of American history?
Well, I mean, I think that the two core principles are liberty and equality. Now, they have to be properly understood. Liberty is not license. It's the freedom of people to live the good life, right? To fulfill their own goals, to provide for their family. Many of the founders would say to serve God and seek salvation. Sometimes we use the term ordered liberty to refer to that.
I think ordered liberty was one of the names we thought about maybe for this podcast.
We did because libertarianism is sometimes good as far as it goes, but I think that a lot of times it forgets that people have to live together, and that there's always going to be a tension between how we live together and allowing us sort of the freedom to do just whatever we want. And so there's a balance to be struck there. Same thing with equality, right? The liberty is something which will often produce unequal outcomes. But equality, I think, in this sense, is meant to include it doesn't mean equal outcomes. It means equality under the law. That is, that we are all equal citizens entitled to the same respect, bearing the same rights, and owing the same obligations.
Let's go back in time to 1776, July 4th. Would you have signed your name to the Declaration of Independence? And it's maybe easy to say, but the risk that people took and what happened to all the signers, so you would have been one of those people. What do you think you would have done?
Well, we'd all like to think that we would be courageous enough to do that, and I'm going to think that too. I think that I agree with Frederick Douglass, who I think he was actually referring to the Constitution, but he could have been referring to the Declaration. He called it a glorious liberty document, and so I hope that I would have had the courage to sign it, but I guess we'll never know.
You brought up Frederick Douglass, who brought up glorious liberty document, even though he was at the time fighting for the abolition of slavery, right?
Right. Well, and he said that in a speech called "What is the 4th of July to a Slave?"
Okay.
And
that's
and he was under no illusions about the incompleteness of the American founding, right? And he was very scathing in pointing out the ways in which a person who was enslaved might not think that the 4th of July was the greatest thing in the world, because he and his family would have been excluded from all of this wonderful stuff that we celebrate. But he said, nevertheless, that that the Constitution, the Declaration of the Constitution, had created a system. Martin Luther King later said that it was a promissory note that eventually would have to be extended to those who were excluded at the outset. And he was confident, I think, that one day that would happen, and he was proven to be correct.
So, with this episode being very themed on the 4th of July and America's founding, I think there's two sides to this. You have, on one side, you have this idea of American greatness, this idea of American exceptionalism. The other side, there's, like we alluded to with slavery, and a number of shortcomings in American history. Looking back in time, you could say that America did shameful things. I think there's a number of different types of historical events that could have been maybe handled differently, right? Like that's what one side says versus, the other side that says, well, we are the greatest country on earth. We've always been, when Marco Rubio was running for president, he was running on the campaign of American exceptionalism. So, do you lean towards one side or the other, or do you want to?
The Declaration and the Constitution did go on to create the greatest country on earth. But I think there's a lesson, and, you can characterize it in your mind however you want. You can focus on the fallen nature of humanity. You can think of us as built of crooked timber, that old saying. But the fact of the matter is that it was a compromise. It was a compromise because had the founders insisted on the abolition of slavery at the outset, the Union would not have been formed, or at least so they believed, and that's probably right. Just as a descriptive matter, that doesn't make it okay. And in fact, I think that many of the framers themselves were well aware that it was not okay. This is why they never explicitly acknowledged slavery in the document. I think that many of them saw this as an issue that was going to be resolved somewhere down the road. I think there was a belief at the time that slavery would wither away because the economic basis for it was fading, right? And then we have the whole story of the cotton gin and how that sort of gave the whole peculiar institution a shot in the arm. So I think that I think you have to be careful by importing the judgments and the perspective that we have today over 200 years into the past. I think we can acknowledge that this was a tragic shortcoming, right? That took a long time to remedy, was ultimately remedied by a particularly bloody civil war, and even then took another roughly 100 years to completely extirpate, and eliminate, Jim Crow in the South, and in some ways is a thing that we still struggle with today. But I think to recognize that we were imperfect does not mean that we ought to lose sight of the tremendous step forward that for both Americans and for the world that our founding was. And, Frederick Douglass, he didn't overlook that. We talked about the Glorious Liberty document. Martin Luther King did not overlook that. He talked about a promissory note. And so I think that it's important to keep that in mind. Were we at that point in time moving forward to something better even though we didn't fully achieve it at the time. I think we were.
So I think then, just kind of to sum up the conversation a little bit, it seems like the U.S. Constitution, in a way, was a vehicle to a country that could always improve on itself. Would you say that that's fair?
Right. I mean, that didn't mean it was easy, but I think that possibility was there, both in the fact that, of course, the Constitution itself can be amended, but also in the notion that that the Declaration in particular set down some markers, and those markers would eventually have to be acknowledged and dealt with. Abraham Lincoln, talked about the Declaration as the apple of gold and the Constitution as the frame of silver. And, I think what the Declaration promised could not readily be ignored. We tried, or some people tried. You had the Dred Scott decision that, said, well, of course, our framers, they promised equality and freedom for all, and since they couldn't be hypocrites, they must not have intended to include black people. But there was no basis for excluding black people, and that position that Chief Justice Taney took in Dred Scott was morally flawed and ultimately unsustainable.
So one of the things we were just talking about is, let's just, for what could be perceived as shortcomings throughout American history. But in a lot of ways, if you look through various historical events, and whether it's World Wars, the Cold War, America has always been an alternative to something else. And so you at one point, even Rick, said, well, if you're going to compare America, if you're going to look back on history and compare America to something, what are you comparing it to?
Yeah, that's an important thing particularly when we're judging things in the past, where we say that, we think that the founding was imperfect. Well, you have to ask yourself, well, compared to what? And that's why I said earlier that, we have to ask ourselves, were we moving forward? Were we moving towards something better? And I think we established the principles that permitted us, I think, to move forward to something better. That there was part of the founding that was realized back in the late 18th century, but there was also part of it that was still only aspirational, and there was work to do. Right? It was to sort of play on the name of this podcast. It was not simply about keeping what we began with, but also about fully realizing it. And I also mentioned that step forward was not only for the people of the United States of America, but really became an example, something that could be aspirational for everyone in the world, right? And Ronald Reagan talked about, this country is a shining city on a hill. Well, a shining city on a hill is good in and of itself, but it's also good for those who see the city and want to emulate it. And so I think that, as I said before, 4th of July is a heck of a thing, to celebrate. It would be sad to imagine the world as it might be today without it.
Well, and throughout, American history and the world history, there seems to be these moments in time when, people wanted to come to America, and they still do. We still talk about immigration to this day, but look at World War II and the migration from some of these countries near Nazi Germany to America. And I think, the whole concept of the Cold War, I think you had Berlin and Germany was split, and people wanted to move to the capitalist side. And I think that speaks volumes to, even at a time when maybe America wasn't perfect, because it's at the same time that, Jim Crow's happening, right? Like all of this stuff's happening, within the same 10 years of each other. But relatively speaking, we were seen as a model.
Yeah, I mean, people vote with their feet, right? And we obviously immigration is a really aggravated and hotly contested issue now. But and I'm not. I certainly would never argue that anybody who wants to come to the United States can come to the United States. But let's ask ourselves why people are coming to the United States. And the reality is that the overwhelming majority of people who seek to migrate to the United States are people who simply want a better life for themselves, right? They want an opportunity to have a better job, to provide more for their family. And, it may be a sad reality that we can't assimilate everyone, right? We can't we can't have open borders. I mean, the fact that very few countries in the world have them, I think suggests that it's not practical to do that. But I think we ought to understand what the fact that all of these people want to come to the United States implies. They're not all coming to collect welfare. They're not all coming to sell drugs. They're not all coming to commit terrorist acts. In fact, most of them are coming because we just want a better life.
Well, then what would you say, because we have a new president this year, and he is a relatively polarizing figure for the most part, and I think we saw this in his previous term as well. People saying they don't, what's there to celebrate with the American 4th of July, and I think it is maybe in this day and age, people would say the 4th of July is dead, right? Like they're not going to celebrate it. You could talk to a certain group of people online and they would say that. What would be your response to that? Are you aware of people saying stuff like that?
Well, I mean, I think this is maddening to me. And I know a lot of times you'll see people who are complaining about the United States who are among the most privileged individuals who have ever walked the face of the earth.
Well, yeah, how so?
You have to ask yourself, if you had the opportunity to choose the time and place of your birth from anywhere in the world, from the beginning of civilization to today, what would you pick? And odds are you'd pick being born in the United States of America in the 21st century.
I
mean, in terms of individual freedom, in terms of respect, in terms of the position of persons who members of groups that were historically discriminated against, of freedom. It's hard to find a place that you would choose instead of this one. And to be sure, you can find things to criticize. You can find imperfections. I think that this is a fallen world, and that will always be the case. But is there really any better place to be? And so it seems to me that if you believe that, and I think if you're honest with yourself, you do, then you have to temper your criticism, right? And you have to understand that, I think things could be improved. I think this could be better. I think that could be better. I think we should do this instead of what we're doing now. But you can't lose touch with the fact that you live in a really wonderful place, one in which it's possible for you to make these criticisms, to have these observations, and then work to make things better.
So I assume then that you are celebrating the 4th of July with some pride this year.
Oh, absolutely, and every year. I'm not the biggest one for fireworks because I have a golden retriever who's scared by them, but absolutely, we're going to get those grills going, and
what do you grill?
To pop a few. I have to say, I make the best barbecue chicken on a green egg, which I
Okay.
very heartily eat.
What's your perfect 4th of July spread? So the barbecue chicken, what else? Anything else?
Well, you got to have corn on the cob. It's not really a traditional 4th of July food, but my wife likes mashed potatoes, and what she wants, she generally gets.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it like, would you say, like, where's your perfect setting for a 4th of July? Is it at home? Is it at a lake? Or you guys?
No, at home.
The couple last questions I wanted to get to then is like, what is a patriotic 4th of July beverage in your eyes?
Well, it can be almost anything you like, but and I have to say that I'm a bigger wine drinker than a beer drinker, but I think 4th of July is beer, and my beer of choice is some kind of IPA.
Any specific brand? Or you
No, I'm not picky.
not picky at all? Okay. That wraps up this week's episode, if you can keep it. Join us next time. We'll dive into the latest from the Supreme Court, perhaps the latest from the Wisconsin Supreme Court, including redistricting conversations, and of course, we'll cover the latest from Washington, D.C. So that will be our 3rd episode coming out on July 7th. And again, you can find us at will-law.org/podcast or wherever you get your podcasts. So thanks for listening, and happy 4th of July.